Hey, it's Jeremy at BuildASoil. I just wanted to go over our growing system with you. We've had a lot of questions about it. And so if you take a look at my screen, I've got our website pulled up and I'm going to use the mouse. I always want to point, but I know it's kind of hard to tell on the screen here. So the growing system is the link. Once you're at our main page, you can see this link. And when you hover, it turns green. Click on the growing system. And that's going to take you to an introduction about our process, a couple of different basic rules, mainly about using mulch and about making sure that we follow building the soil instead of really trying to feed the plant. And so if this is new to you, you're going to want to read through this entire thing here. And on the new updated schedule, you can see this is where we've put most of the information. And so the BuildASoil methods of do-it-yourself versus like a premium product method. And so we've got all this additional info, and at the bottom you're going to see the actual schedule. And if you click on this image, it'll actually bring up the file so you can download it, print it out, do whatever you'd like with that. So go ahead and get that up, maybe print it out so you can follow along. I'm going to do one video on the introduction part and setting up your soil. And then I'm going to do a video on each section of this chart so that you can actually see what I meant by all these different numbers on here and maybe a process to consider. Because you can certainly build a soil and do water only. A lot of growers are wanting to do a little bit extra, use some biostimulants to keep the biology active, maybe increase the yield a little bit without sacrificing quality, and sometimes even increase that quality by activating certain things in the soil, using enzymes, things like that. So we'll discuss a few of those points. This is the form I'm going to go over. And I'm going to start, before we get in that form, in the updated schedule in this video so I can go over the basics of how to set up your container. And I'm going to be really specific. We're going to treat this as a 15-gallon geopod. And I'll probably do another video on like an earth box and a larger container. But I think if you were to get this right, you could easily understand that in a larger container, it's just going to be easier. In a smaller container, you might want to do this process with every watering instead of once a week. And so I think that's a really healthy way to think about this. The more soil and the more light and the better environment, the better genetics, you can get away with very little inputs. But when you start going down to a 15-gallon, 10-gallon, 5-gallon, the plant is going to grow fast and it's going to start taking nutrients from that soil. And pretty soon there's going to be an imbalance. And that limiting factor might be a nutrient, it might be moisture, it might be biology. But if we can keep ahead of those limiting factors, that's really what this program's about. And so this should widen your margin for error, keep the yield high, and really get that organic, unbelievable quality that you're after. So the new updated schedule, BuildASoil methods. The soil recipe, so you can either purchase it from us, purchase the do-it-yourself kit from us, or completely make this yourself using ingredients that you find locally. Now, when you use ingredients locally, a lot of people want to test them in a lab or at least find what might have the best reputation because ingredients in different regions, like the compost, can be widely different. And for instance, in our recipe, we use like 30% compost. With a local one, you might want to use maybe only 10% compost because of the amount of salts or the amount of nutrients that's in it. So keep that in mind. The basic recipe when you're using our ingredients is a 3-part recipe. 1 part Canadian sphagnum peat moss, 1 part premium thermal compost, and a lot of people put a little bit of worm castings as part of that part. And that's the most important part, so don't skimp on the compost. The 3rd part is the aeration and drainage. We use a little pumice and rice hulls. Sometimes we use pumice, rice hulls, and grow stone. You could just use perlite. There's advantages and disadvantages to all of these, but ultimately, we're just trying to get compost, peat moss, and aeration together to create the texture of a potting soil that we're used to. And we can get into detail in another video, but perlite is mined from obsidian, and then there's a lot of energy spent into expanding it, where rice hulls is a waste product, and it adds silica, where pumice is mined and it doesn't have as much energy and is more available, and it's used for other industries, so we have a lot of testing on it. So if you've got questions about that stuff, feel free to email us or look to our blog for more information about each component. So now we've got the basic recipe, 3 parts, peat moss, aeration, and a compost. Okay, you can mix up those parts a little bit, but that's the basic. Per cubic foot of total soil volume, you're going to want to add nutrients and minerals. Here we list the basic nutrients that we use. A 1/2 cup of each. Kelp meal, premium neem intercaranja cake, and a premium crustacean meal. That's a total of 1.5 cups of these nutrients when you're done because there's 3 different ingredients. All right, 1/2 cup kelp, 1/2 cup neem caranja, 1/2 cup crustacean meal. And then to that, we add 2 cups of basalt, 1 cup of gypsum, and 1 cup of oyster shell flour per cubic foot of soil. This gives us our micronutrients, our calcium, all the things that build this diverse soil texture. And then the bonuses that you look right here would be adding a little bit of extra, maybe fish bone meal or a malted barley flour, which we've started doing in our 3.0 recipe. Really helps the soil come together and get alive with biology. All right, so mix away, and you can plant right into this once you mix it up, or you can actually tuck it away in a container, in a tarp, and get the moisture right and let it kind of homogenize and come together and get the biology active in it. And once that's done, you're going to have a better transition into your gardening process instead of just mixing it and planting it. But I did want to let you know that this recipe is so basic, you can mix it up and you can plant into it, as opposed to the older super soil recipes where there was just a ton of nutrients. You had to let it sit for months at a time. This is very different from that. All right, now to prepare the soil for planting, this is the most important part I want to go over in this video, because this will get you into the actual nutrient or the actual like soil feeding schedule that's down here. So right here, how to prepare the soil for planting. I want to make sure that you guys can see this, so I'm going to jump this out and bring it over just a little bit. Oop. Maybe I can. Let's see here. All right, that should work. So right here, the new updated schedule. I went over all the information in the soil. If you need more content, we actually have some posts about that as well on how to make the soil. Here's the most important part, how to prepare it for planting. So I'm going to read this. Ideally, we want to get our soil out of the bag and into the grow container and in the actual grow space we're using. So if you're going to use some soil for cloning and seedlings, you can do the same thing in very small containers. However, most growers just use soil without the cover crop and top dressings until they're transplanted into their final homes. It's up to you. What I mean by that is I'm going to go through like a layering and a mulch method here. Some growers actually put cover crop and mulch right in their little beer cup or right in their little 1 gallon container because they want to make sure that they're being consistent. I think that takes a lot of effort, and a lot of times it's really worth it. But when you start to get to a whole bunch of different seedlings, a lot of times it's easier to just put a decent amount of soil, water them, get them the size you want, and then plug them into your full ecosystem. So that's going to be up to you and how much time you have. Here's the system. So pour the soil into the geopot. A 15-gallon minimum per plant is the idea for like a no-till setup, okay? Water slowly to evenly saturate. So we use the 1949 sprayer from Chapin. That allows you to actually spray particulate like compost tea. It's got a couple different nozzles, and that slow watering will allow all the water to penetrate this brand new soil. If you don't have a way to really mist it slowly, you can just water a little now, come back 10 minutes later, water a little more, and it'll kind of start that wicking effect. The good rule of thumb is to use 10% by volume water or 1 gallon for every 10 gallons of soil used. And another tip is to use like aloe or yucca to help hydrate this peat moss. And so if you got our no-till bundle, you'll have both the aloe and that yucca extract, the Thermex 70. So let me go down to this chart really quickly. I'll pull up the chart. And you can see here it says how to prepare your soil. Use 10% by volume water. So I have this information loosely put on the chart. But if you didn't know that it was written in more detail, this might be important for you to look at because I go break it down. Once you've gotten that done, you can sow the cover crop at a rate of about 1 tablespoon per square foot of your container. Basically, I just scoop into my cover crop bag and I kind of sprinkle it around the top of my container like salt and pepper. But if you want to, you can use like a tablespoon and just get one of those on each plant. All right. And then once you get that done and it's sprinkled on there, then you're going to sprinkle a 1/4 cup of our craft blend, which is basically just a mixture of a whole bunch of premium amendments. So if you don't have craft blend, you could use something from the gardening store, like an all-around tomato fertilizer with a low NPK of like 342 or 222 or whatever you've got there. That's fine. The idea is we want to build some nutrition into that mulch layer so that as our plants grow, there's a source of continually adding nutrition. And so once we sprinkle the 1/4 cup of the craft blend around the base of the plant, you follow up with an 1/8 cup per plant of like a Grokashi or a Bokashi. If you don't have that, don't worry about it. You should have the Rootwise and you should have some other products in the no-till bundle. But the reason why we put the dry brand Bokashi is because it's got biology on it and it's got the food from the actual rice brand that it's made from, or the wheat brand. And when you sprinkle it with the craft blend and it's in that mulch layer, it's actually going to help ferment. It's going to help like break down and digest some of those dry amendments so that we actually build that nutrition into the soil. And so what I mean by that is normally in like nutrient bottles, those nutrients are ready to go. When we're using dry amendments, we need biology to help break it down and deliver it through the soil food web. So that bokashi, that grow kashi, you can put an 1/8 cup down. So to reiterate, we've sprinkled our cover crop, we've sprinkled the craft blend, we've now sprinkled some grow kashi, and then we want to cover all of this with about like a 1/4 inch to maybe a 1/2 inch of some homemade castings or our Build-A-Flower top dress kit or some compost like the Malibu or Ollie Mountain, whatever you've got. If you've got that, put a layer, and this will cover the craft blend, it'll cover the seeds, and this will hold the moisture in so that we get this fertility, so that the cover crop germinates. And the last layer that we want to add, well, first we want to add, you can see here, 100 to 500 red wigglers per cubic foot of soil. That's a lot. I've seen people recommend that high number. I wanted to make sure that people got the best benefit right away. So if you get, several cubic feet of soil, let's say you've got 2 cubic feet, which is that 15-gallon container, and you've got 4 of them. A pound of worms split between all of that's going to be way more than enough. But another way might be just to set up your worm bin and only put like 5 or 10 worms in each container, because they're going to multiply up to a sustainable level. If you put too many worms in, you might see them unhappy in the beginning. So don't overthink this. Just put a few worms in each container. If you happen to have a small amount of plants, you can also put from 100 to 500, without overdoing it. Lastly, cover all of this with 1 to 3 inches, a thick layer of barley straw or of gnat nicks or of sand or of bark mulch or of anything that you want that's going to be that actual mulch layer. We use the barley straw because the cover crop grows through it. And when the cover crop grows through and we chop and drop, it hits the brown straw and it starts to decompose and make compost right in that mulch layer. And the worms like to stay below the straw, and they eat all the craft blend and they eat the fallen leaves, and they start to compost material right there on the mulch layer. So I feel like it's really important. However, I know a lot of people that, in their 1 gallons, they'll use sand or gnat nicks and no cover crops. They never have any gnats. And when they move into their full finished 15 gallons or their larger containers, they're going to have predator mites, nematodes, and they're going to have mulch. And so they'll have this ecosystem where if a gnat or two shows up, it's not going to ever be a problem, because gnats are kind of one of the only challenges we have in organics. We've eliminated a lot of the other big pest problems that you hear about in hydro. And the healthy plants that grow out of organics usually have very little issues. But because we add tons of fresh compost and decaying mulch, if we get a source of fungus gnats, it can be a really good food source for them. So keep that in mind. All right. Once we've covered with the straw, lastly, gently mist that or water it in so to bring the whole top dressing all together and moisten the straw and get it all so it's like a cake on there. So that's the idea. We put the soil in, we put the cover crop in, we put some top dressing on there, and we cover that with a little compost and a little straw, and now we're further ahead into the no-till process. It's almost like we've been doing it for a cycle now, where we would have had the cover crop come in, we would have top dressed, and so now everything's built and it's ready to go. Now that you have your soil prepared, you're ready to follow our simple, proven schedule. Here are the options. So the instructions for the schedule. Option 1, purchase the bundle and follow along with our system below. I'm going to assume you did that. I'm going to go over our section of the bundle. Option 2 would be, right, if you have more time, you can follow their same program with 100% do-it-yourself inputs, and we can teach you how to make them. So that would be the second section on this do-it-yourself plant schedule, and that would be like homemade lactobacillic acid using sprouted seed teas for enzymes instead of the root-wise enzymes that we offer. So I want you to know that you don't have to buy products, but if you're like me and you're busy and you want to work with a really quality company that makes a very good product, I want you to have those options too. So those are the 3 options, or the 2 options. And the last one, if you hate systems, you just want to follow a loose guideline, we've got like a basic 14-day schedule. And it's like a water, a no water, a water with an additive, a no water, a plain water, a compost tea. So look at that schedule. Fit the one that fits your style the best. And I would say in the beginning, try and do less. That way, when you get several cycles in, you can determine if adding more is really helpful. All right, now the next video, now that we went over setting up our soil, is actually going to go over this spreadsheet. I'm going to go over the growth stage, how to read this chart, what it actually means, and we're going to go over week 1 on the first video so that I can talk to you about clones or seedlings and how to get them prepared for this system. And then our video after that is going to go into like the week 2 and the final veg period, and we're going to have a video for each part of this section. I hope that helps. If you've got questions, please email them to support@buildasoil.com, or maybe send us a message on social media, Instagram, Facebook, or you can always call us here at the office. Hope that helps. Have a great day.